Imagine getting a survival guide that's specifically designed to cure your modern digital age anxiety.
Right, like a manual for navigating social media outrage or constant stress.
Exactly, just the sheer overwhelming noise of existing right now. But here's the catch. This guide was allegedly written by a woman who was burned alive at the Colosseum in the 1st century.
It's a profound and almost jarring juxtaposition, really.
It is.
You expect a text with that kind of ancient origin story to be, purely philosophical, maybe a bit detached from our reality.
Right.
But instead it reads like a highly clinical diagnosis of the 21st century.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're opening a deeply unusual, highly scientific, and frankly fascinating Portuguese text called Jesus a Vida, which translates to Jesus and Life.
Yes.
And our mission here is to decode this unique spiritual survival guide. We're going to unpack how it blends spiritual philosophy, psychology, and this is the part that really hooked me, actual mind-body science, into a pedagogy for living in a chaotic world.
It's quite the blend.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even begin to look at the advice in this book, we have to talk about the origin story. We have to talk about who exactly is claiming to give us this advice.
We do, because it fundamentally shifts how you absorb the material. The book we're analyzing today was Psychograph.
Which means it was spiritually dictated, right?
Exactly. It was dictated by a very well-known Brazilian medium named Divaldo Franco. However, the text attributes the actual authorship to a spirit named Joanna de Ângelis.
Right, so we are essentially dealing with the ultimate ghostwriter.
Literally.
Quite literally. And the source material claims that Joanna de Ângelis isn't just some anonymous voice from the ether. She has this vast, meticulously documented history of reincarnations across centuries.
She does. The text traces her lineage through some of the most intense crucibles of human history. She's said to have been Joanna de Cusa, a 1st century Christian who was martyred.
She was burned alive alongside her son at the Colosseum.
Yes, exactly. And then fast forward to the 17th century in Mexico. The claim is she reincarnated as Juana Inés de la Cruz.
Oh, wow.
Historians widely consider her one of the most brilliant poets, philosophers, and intellectuals of the entire Hispanic world.
Which is an incredible leap. From a 1st century martyr to a 17th century intellectual powerhouse.
Right, and it doesn't stop there.
Yeah, the text places her in the 19th century in Brazil as Joana Angélica de Jesus, who was a martyr who died physically defending her convent during the violent struggles for Brazilian independence.
It's a staggering resume.
Truly. And now operating through Divaldo Franco, she has supposedly authored 58 books that have been translated into 10 different languages.
58 books. But here's why that background really matters for our deep dive today. Whether you, as a listener, view reincarnation as a literal spiritual reality or, simply as a fascinating psychological framework.
Yeah.
The architecture of her argument is incredibly compelling. Because of this claimed lineage, the voice in the text possesses a profound, long view of human history.
That makes total sense. This isn't some modern pundit reacting to this week's news cycle and panicking.
Precisely. This is a perspective that claims to have watched empires rise and inevitably collapse. It's watched human cruelty and human brilliance play out over millennia.
Wow.
And that gives the text a clinical, almost detached patience. It isn't just trying to describe what we are experiencing in our current chaotic society. It's attempting to explain why it is happening on a massive evolutionary scale.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, her diagnosis of our current era pulled absolutely no punches. She looks at the state of the world, the endless wars, the environmental collapse, the deep moral decay.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, she doesn't see it as the apocalypse. She doesn't view this as the end of the world. She calls it the Great Transition.
The Great Transition. It's described in the text as a structural, atmospheric, and moral upheaval. The central thesis here is that the Earth is essentially undergoing a massive upgrade.
An upgrade?
Yeah. The framework suggests that rebellious, stagnant spirits who refuse to evolve are slowly being relocated to lower, denser worlds.
Oh, interesting.
Meanwhile, noble spirits, those who are actually interested in the hard work of rebuilding a fractured society, are reincarnating here to take their place.
That instantly makes me think of a planetary detox.
A detox.
Yeah, if you've ever tried a serious physical detox, the reality is that it gets incredibly ugly and painful as the toxins start leaving your system.
Oh, definitely. You feel awful.
You usually feel completely terrible. Your skin breaks out, you get headaches, all before the body actually heals and reaches a new, higher baseline of health. The way this text portrays our current societal chaos, it's almost like the toxins of human history are rising to the surface to finally be expelled.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, really. The friction we feel is the expulsion of those toxins. And according to Joanna de Ângelis, one of the most stubborn toxins we're currently expelling is our modern form of idolatry.
Right.
The text sharply critiques what it calls lamentable cults.
Which is fascinating because, as modern people, we love to congratulate ourselves on being so advanced. We think we've completely outgrown ancient polytheism.
You really do.
We aren't, sacrificing animals on stone altars or worshiping literal statues of gold anymore.
But the text argues that the underlying mechanism hasn't changed at all. We've simply updated the wardrobe of our ancient gods. We replaced the golden statues with the obsessive worship of money, fleeting fame, and power.
So we're essentially still bowing down to golden calves. We've just reshaped them into glowing smartphone screens and bank accounts.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how it dissects the role of media in this modern idolatry. The text points out that our media ecosystems actively elevate scandalous, grotesque behavior.
Perhaps.
We've entirely confused audacity, aggression, and drug-fueled excess with heroism. We worship people who are famous entirely for the sake of being famous.
While at the exact same time, we completely ignore what the text defines as actual true heroism.
Yes.
Because she argues that real heroism is almost always anonymous. The real heroes aren't the ones going viral on television or social media.
They're not the influencers.
Right. They're the exhausted parents sacrificing their own desires to educate their kids. They're the scientists grinding away quietly in laboratories for decades.
The underpaid teachers.
Exactly. The nurses on a night shift. The people physically building a better world in the shadows without ever demanding a round of applause.
Because in the framework of the Great Transition, this loud, attention-seeking moral decay isn't a sign of dominance. It is the dying breath of the human ego.
Wow.
True evolution happens quietly, through service. All of this loud, aggressive chaos we see in the world is just the friction of the old, ego-driven world violently resisting the birth of the new one.
Okay, I buy that macro perspective. But here's my issue. If the world right now is this noisy, idol-worshipping detox center, how does the individual actually survive it?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Right. Understanding that society is transitioning over centuries is great, but it doesn't help me get through a stressful Tuesday.
No, it doesn't.
And this is where the text makes a massive pivot that genuinely shocked me. It moves away from broad spiritual philosophy and introduces the concept of interasso mente corpo, mind-body interaction.
Yes, and it does so by diving straight into highly specific biological terminology. It doesn't just offer platitudes like, just think happy thoughts. It explicitly details our neurochemistry.
Wait, let me pause you there, because we need to address this. You're telling me a book supposedly authored by a 1st century Christian martyr and a 17th century poet is suddenly diving into neuropeptides.
I know, it sounds wild.
It explicitly lists dopamine, serotonin, and immunoglobulins. How does a spiritual text even bridge the gap into modern immunology without sounding completely ridiculous?
It bridges the gap by introducing a very specific mechanism. It doesn't just say your spirit magically heals your body, it explains the how. The text introduces the concept of the perispirit.
Okay, what is that?
The perispirit is described as a subtle, energetic body that perfectly surrounds and penetrates the physical body. Think of your pure, raw consciousness as a high-voltage power line.
Okay, I'm with you.
Your physical cellular body cannot directly handle that raw, abstract energy. So the perispirit acts as a biological transformer.
Oh, wow.
It steps down that spiritual frequency into a physical chemical signal. It translates the abstract, invisible feeling of peace into the physical, measurable molecule of serotonin.
That is wild. It's a literal translation layer between the soul and the synapse. Mm-hmm. The text actually refers to the human mind as a mental power plant, and you've seen a mental.
Yes.
So if I'm operating this power plant, the thoughts I choose to dwell on are the fuel.
Exactly. And if the fuel you're constantly burning in your mental power plant is resentment, fear, or insecurity, the perispirit conducts that toxic frequency directly into your cellular structure.
Jeez.
The exhaust from that toxic fuel isn't just invisible smoke. It's a surge of cortisol. It disrupts your immune system and genuinely invites illness into the body.
It's like a slow drip poison IV that we voluntarily hook ourselves up to every single morning when we wake up and immediately start doom scrolling.
That's exactly what it is.
Conversely, if we burn compassion and prayer as fuel, the perispirit conducts harmony, stimulating those positive neuropeptides and boosting our immunoglobulins, we are literally synthesizing our own medicine or our own poison.
Now, to maintain analytical distance here, the text is realistic. It doesn't claim you're immortal if you just smile enough.
Right.
It openly acknowledges that physical death is an inevitable biological reality and genetic illnesses exist. But the core argument is that our mental emissions dictate the day-to-day quality of our physical and emotional survival while we are inhabiting these bodies.
So you were sitting in the control room of the power plant. But how do you maintain control when the alarms are constantly blaring?
Yeah, that's the challenge.
The text says the key is cultivating silence. Capital S. Silence. Because the outside world is completely consumed by what it calls balbúrdia, which is just a fantastic Portuguese word.
It really is.
It perfectly encapsulates aggressive, chaotic, overwhelming noise. We are relentlessly bombarded by loud opinions, loud media, loud politics. If we don't actively carve out internal silence, our neurochemistry never gets a chance to stabilize.
That's the danger of balbúrdia. If you lack internal silence, you're permanently in a state of reaction. You become a passive victim of the external environment rather than the master of your internal power plant.
Wow.
The noise dictates your chemistry rather than your consciousness dictating it.
Okay, I think I understand the internal survival guide. I can see how if I sit in my quiet room, I can control my power plant. I can find silence. I can balance my neuropeptides.
Okay.
But the second I step out my front door, someone cuts me off in traffic or attacks me on social media or undermines me at work. Does this entire biological harmony just collapse the minute another human ego enters the picture?
It's a great question.
How do we navigate relationships during this messy transition?
This brings us to another fascinating architectural pillar of the text, amizidotherapia, which translates directly to friendship therapy.
Friendship therapy.
The text argues that navigating other egos requires a specific kind of bond. It posits that true, pure friendship isn't just a pleasant social construct or a nice thing to have. It's a fundamental biological and spiritual necessity for survival.
It claims that true friendship literally acts as an analgesic. It releases endorphins, attenuates physical pain, and can measurably extend your physical life.
Because humans are, at our core, deeply gregarious biopsychosocial animals. Isolation is recognized by our biology as an emergency state. It breeds biological stress.
That makes a lot of sense.
Genuine friendship provides a continuous biofeedback loop of safety, belonging, and physiological harmony. But the text heavily contrasts this deeply healing bond with what we experience most of the time, which it calls modern duels.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When we think of duels, we picture the 18th century, right? Two guys in ruffled shirts pacing out 10 steps at dawn with flintlock pistols.
Or crossing swords over some perceived slight to their honor.
Right. It's highly ritualized, very physical violence.
It was a very visible manifestation of pride.
Exactly. But Joanna de Ângelis argues that human beings haven't actually evolved past the desire to duel. We've just moved the battlefield inside.
Yes.
Today, people duel mentally. We use passive-aggressive behavior, internet arguments, cancel culture, vicious gossip, and workplace slander.
It's constant.
According to the text, when we do this, we are firing literal waves of toxic mental energy at each other. There might be less visible blood on the ground, but it's exactly the same intent to destroy the other person standing. We've just internalized the swords.
It is the exact same mechanism of the ego, just dressed in modern clothes. The text refers to this clinging to resentment as a moral morbidity.
A moral morbidity.
It is literally a sickness born of wounded pride. When you hold on to resentment against someone who wronged you, you're essentially engaging in a continuous, exhausting mental duel that never ends.
Why do we hold on to resentment as if it's a prize? It feels so good in the moment to be self-righteous, but the text clearly shows it's the equivalent of drinking poison and hoping the other person dies.
That's spot on.
You're just feeding toxic exhaust back into your own mental power plant.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture of the Great Transition, the text views resentment as the ultimate evolutionary trap. It anchors you to a much lower vibrational state. Yes, you feel totally justified in your anger, and that absolutely feeds your pride, but it completely halts your spiritual and biological evolution. This is where the text profoundly redefines the concept of charity.
How so?
We usually think of charity as writing a check or giving bread to the hungry. And while the text agrees those are vital actions, it argues that true, ultimate charity is the act of forgiving others. It is having the immense, almost superhuman spiritual strength to put down your internal weapon, step off the dueling ground, and walk away entirely.
That is brutally hard to do. To just drop the mental sword when someone has legitimately wronged you.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult.
But the alternative is locking yourself in a toxic feedback loop that literally degrades your immune system.
Exactly. But here is the final piece of the puzzle we have to address.
Yeah.
Even if you completely master your internal silence, and even if you cultivate incredible friendship therapy and you successfully walk away from every mental duel,
Right?
suffering is still going to find you. Pain is an unavoidable metric of the human experience.
You can do everything perfectly right and still get hit by a massive curveball, a health crisis, a financial ruin, the loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the core existential question of this deep dive.
Yes.
If we're supposed to be evolving, if our neurochemistry wants harmony, why is there so much suffering? What is the actual function of pain, according to this framework?
The text completely shifts our perspective on pain. It argues vehemently that suffering is never, under any circumstances, a divine punishment.
Okay.
It is instead a pedagogical tool. It is a highly structured curriculum for evolution. Every failure, every heartbreak, every agonizing illness is viewed as a bespoke lesson designed specifically to teach you how to grow for the next phase of your existence.
It actually compares Jesus to the ultimate pedagogue, the master teacher of this intense curriculum.
Yes, exactly.
It makes me think of suffering not as a judge banging a gavel, but as a strict, unrelenting personal trainer.
That's a great analogy.
You might absolutely hate them in the moment. You're doing the burpees, your muscles are screaming, lactic acid is burning, and you feel like you're going to physically collapse.
Yeah.
You're asking, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
But the trainer isn't punishing you. They are systematically breaking down your current limitations to build muscles you didn't even know you were going to need for the heavy lifting of your future.
That analogy maps perfectly onto the text's philosophy, and it raises a critical question about how we respond to that training. Because the text explicitly states that rebelliousness, the act of fighting against the reality of the lesson, is what turns a necessary evolutionary step into a prolonged, unnecessary affliction.
So do we essentially make our own suffering 100 times worse by rebelling against the exact lesson the universe is trying to teach us? We add our own psychological friction to the biological pain.
We do. By refusing to accept the curriculum, we essentially force ourselves to repeat the same grade. Acceptance in this framework doesn't mean you gleefully enjoy the pain. It means you recognize its pedagogical purpose.
Right.
Acceptance is the mechanism that transforms raw pain into actual progress.
And to help us actually handle this grueling curriculum without losing our minds, the text offers one final, brilliantly practical piece of advice. It urges the reader to live entirely in the sempre agora, the always now.
Yes. The philosophical assertion that time, in the way we obsess over it, is largely an illusion that drains our energy.
The text uses this beautiful old proverb, aguas pasadas no mueven moños. Past waters don't move mills.
It's so poetic.
Think about how physically exhausting it is to live in the past or the future. If you are sitting around agonizing over water that has already flowed over the dam, or paralyzed by anxiety about water that hasn't even rained down yet, you're completely wasting the only single moment where you actually possess any power, which is right now, the present second.
Because the always now is the only temporal location where your mental power plant is actually operational, you physically cannot send your energy backwards in time to change an event, and you cannot live in a future that hasn't materialized.
Wow, yeah.
You can only make the active choice to forgive, to seek silence, to be a true friend in this exact current second.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've explored the multi-century perspective of a voice that claims to have watched human history unfold from the Colosseum to the modern day.
We really have.
We've looked at the stark diagnosis of our world, undergoing a painful, toxic, but ultimately necessary great transition. We've unpacked the actual science of our neurochemistry, realizing that we are the sole operators of our own mental power plant, choosing whether to burn the toxic fuel of resentment or the healing fuel of compassion.
The use of mental.
Yes. We've seen how friendship therapy physically heals us, while modern internalized mental duels destroy our immunity. And we fundamentally reframed suffering from a random punishment into a strict personal trainer for our soul, learning to embrace the power of the always now.
When you pull all of those threads together, it truly is a comprehensive pedagogy for living in a chaotic era.
It really is. And the ultimate takeaway here is agency. You are in control. The world might be incredibly loud, but you have the agency to choose internal silence over the chaotic balburdia. You have the agency to step off the dueling ground and choose compassion over the ego trap of resentment today, right now.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the architecture we've just explored. The text mentions that animals express friendship and care through pure biological instinct. It's hardwired. But humans, burdened with our complex intelligence and our incredibly heavy egos, often have to consciously train ourselves to choose compassion over pride.
Right, it's work.
We have to actively fight to forgive. But if Earth is truly in a great transition toward a higher, more refined moral plane, it raises a fascinating question about our trajectory.
What's that?
Will a time come in our deep evolutionary future when human compassion is no longer a conscious, difficult choice we have to struggle with? Will it eventually become an unbreakable biological instinct, just like breathing, or a heartbeat making cruelty physically and biologically impossible for our species?
Oh, wow. That is an incredible thought. Imagine a future world where kindness isn't a difficult moral victory, but an involuntary biological reflex. It completely changes how you look at the struggles we're dealing with today.
It does.
We might just be in the incredibly messy, painful training phase of becoming something profoundly beautiful.
It is a remarkably hopeful way to look at the wilderness of the modern world.
It truly is. So the next time you feel completely lost in the chaotic noise of your daily life, remember you don't need a physical manual on how to build a fire to survive. You already have the mental power plant running inside you. You just have to decide what kind of energy you're going to generate today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we will catch you next time.